questions, write them in the chat. Or if you don't know a word, you don't have to write it in the chat. Just you can interrupt us and ask for the word because I want to make sure you guys understand. And if I'm talking too fast, or if Juju is talking too fast, just let us know. Okay? So let's get started. Also, you guys have access to the handout that I posted on Classroom. So let's go. Okay, so we're gonna start by pronouns. So in the United States, we always ask when we're at school, when we're anywhere more formal, we ask for someone's pronouns. So for example, my pronouns are she, her, hers. Juju, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are also she, her, hers.
Okay, awesome. So this might be a little confusing for you guys because you never heard about it. But we're going to be talking a little bit about why this is important and how that has to do with gender, sexuality, and sex. So if you guys want to go around, we're a lot of people, okay? We're a lot of people. So if you guys can go around very quickly and say your pronouns. So for example, this is how you identify. So I identify as a woman. So I like to be referred to she, her, hers, with she, her, her pronouns. If you identify as a man, you can say he, him, his. Or if you don't identify with either, you can say they, them, them. So they, them, theirs, okay? So you can say she, her, he, him, they, them. So I'm going to call on people on the list or the order that I see them. So Bianca, what are your pronouns?
Can you hear me?
Yes, awesome. There's no right
Okay.
answer, by the way. There's no right answer. Yeah, Eduarda,
Okay.
what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Awesome. Giovanna, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns is she, her, hers.
Awesome. Ellen, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns is she, her, hers too.
Awesome. Isabella.
She, her, hers too.
Awesome. And then Jonas Lima.
My pronouns are he, him, his.
Awesome. Okay. Kaiki.
My pronouns is he, him, his.
Awesome. Leticia.
My pronouns is she, her, hers.
Awesome. Rafaela Souza.
My pronouns is she, her, hers.
Awesome. Romulo.
My pronouns is he, him, his.
Awesome. Sophia.
My pronouns is she, her, hers too.
Pablo.
My pronouns are he, him, his.
Awesome. Valdemir Neto.
My pronouns are he, him, his.
Victor.
My pronouns are he, him.
And finally, And finally, Vinicius.
Oh, my pronouns is he, him, his.
Okay, awesome. Just a sec, I'm just pulling out some notes. Sorry about that. Okay, so for people who are arriving now, we're just going over our pronouns, which is how you like to be referred to. Awesome. So why is this important? Okay, so it's important because there's a difference between sex, gender, and sexuality. So Juju, do you want to take it away?
Okay, so sex, gender, and sexuality aren't the same things, although usually some people kind of get confused and use them together. They actually mean completely different things. So let's start with sexuality, which can also be referred to as sexual orientation. So sexuality or sexual orientation is who you're attracted to emotionally, romantically, and sexually. Sexual orientation or sexuality is fluid. It can change, but that doesn't mean it will change. Some people are sure of their sexual orientation or sexuality from the start, and others take a bit of time. So it's a spectrum, and it's who you're attracted to emotionally, romantically, and sexually. And then there's sex. So sex is a label, male or female, that you're assigned by a doctor at birth. So when you're born, the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl. This is just a label based on the genitals you're born with and the chromosomes you have. It goes on your birth certificate, and most people usually refer to you by the sex you're given at birth. But there's also gender identity, which is different from sex, because gender identity is who you are and what you identify as. So whereas sex is given to you at birth by a doctor, it's a boy or a girl, some people are born and don't really identify with that label of sex. So examples of gender identity is male or female, like the label given at birth, sex. Non-binary, which is not really identifying with either, or genderqueer, which is also not identifying with either. Transgender, which is someone who is born with the sex but doesn't identify with it and actually identifies with male or female, or vice versa, different from what they're given at birth. And gender identity for a lot of people is also a spectrum. So same thing with sexuality. The only similarities they have is that it's different for everybody, and everybody has a different experience with it. So sexual orientation is not gender identity and is not sex. They're not the same thing. They're completely separate from each other, but often talked about together because they kind of have the same theme, but they're not the same thing. So again, I'll just repeat really quickly the differences. Sexual orientation or sexuality is who you're attracted to emotionally, romantically, and sexually. Gender identity is who you are and what you identify as, and sex is a label, male or female, that you're assigned at birth by a doctor. So why is it important that they're different? Why is it important that we make this distinction? So the LGBTQ plus community has historically been discriminated against, and inaccurate or inadequate information, which is not enough. So information is often spread by the media, peers, and even sex educators at times. So not everybody gets this discussion right. And it can be harmful to people who do identify differently than most people, right? So some people do not identify as their sex, which again is what you're assigned at birth. And the way I explain this to people, and the way I've been explained, is that think of it as a box. When you're born, they put you in a box. And for some people, they fit in this box really well, right? It's not too big, not too small, it's perfect. But for other people, this box might be too big or too small. So this box is sex. And so they get moved to a new box that's called gender identity. If they stayed in the old box, sex, they would go their whole life feeling uncomfortable. That is why the difference is important. So that we don't misunderstand and hurt people because we aren't familiar with the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality. Just because we don't understand or it doesn't affect us doesn't mean we shouldn't care about people who it does affect. So why we differentiate between the three, why it's important that we do, is because it's uncomfortable for some people and detrimental in some ways. Detrimental is can really harm them because we aren't recognizing the difference. So how exactly can the oppression of any of these impact someone's life? I want to say that this conversation is, I want to give a trigger warning, which means that it has some tough topics that could harm you guys if I talk about it. So some people are disowned, which means they're kicked out of their families. And when they tell their parents that they have a different sexuality than heterosexual, straight, or a different gender identity than what they were assigned at birth, they get kicked out because their family don't really understand. And so they have to live on the streets, don't have food, have to find another way to survive. Some countries, you can get put in jail because of a different gender identity or sexual orientation or sexuality. Some people get killed. A lot of people get killed actually purely because of their sexuality or differentiating gender identity. Some people commit suicide, which is taking their own lives because it's too much pressure from society, and the oppression that they feel because of their label harms them in some way. So I'm gonna say a story that I think it's a recent story and describes what could happen with the oppression of any of these, how it can harm someone. So
wait, Zhu, just before we keep going, are there any questions at this point about the definition of sex, gender, or sexuality? You can unmute your mic and just ask, or you can send them in the chat.
While I'm talking, just cut me off.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so in that case, if everyone's clear about the difference, Juju, please go ahead.
So again, trigger warning, this is not a nice topic. So there was a girl, her name was Sada Hegazi, who committed suicide. She was a queer woman from Egypt. And I think we're gonna get into the definition of queer on the next slide.
Yeah.
It's a part of the LGBTQ plus community. It's a different sexuality. She committed suicide. She was a queer woman from Egypt. She was at a concert in Egypt and held up the LGBTQ plus flag, which I'm sure you guys know. It's the rainbow one, this. And she was arrested. So that's jail, right? That's how someone can be oppressed. So she was put in jail because of it. And while she was in jail, trigger warning sign of she was raped by people in prison. So after she got out of prison, she fled to Canada, but because of the oppression and the misunderstandings of society, her friends and family, she committed suicide because it was too much for her. So the oppression of any of these can impact someone's lives greatly in ways that we don't necessarily understand when we look at this situation just for what it is. So yes.
Oh my God, thank you for that great explanation of sex, gender, and sexuality, and also that story. And I want to make it clear that this is supposed to be, this is a safe space for everyone. So we will not tolerate any sort of disrespect, any sort of interrupting someone when they're speaking, if they're telling a personal story or if they're defending their opinion. And I expect you guys to have all sorts of different opinions, and that's why we're having a discussion, because we want to talk about. But an opinion is different from hating. It's different from a hate comment. So I want to make it clear that everything we say here is confidential, and I'm going to stop recording once there's something very that's something very personal that you'd like to tell me. No, I don't want this on video. I don't want anyone knowing about this, okay? So thank you, Jules, and let's move forward. So before we go on, can anybody tell me what they understood from Jules' definition of sex, gender, and sexuality? So what is the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality? And you can unmute your mics for this.
I can.
Go ahead, please.
Sex is when you born and doctor say, look at your organs, I don't know, and say, you are a girl and you are a boy. Sexuality is when you are attracted to a woman or a man.
Yes. Or some other gender.
You are in.
Sorry, go ahead.
In LGBTQ, it's the gender. the line the box you participate.
Yes, and something very important that Juju mentioned, that sometimes you cannot choose a box. Sometimes you live in a spectrum. So a spectrum is like, how can I explain what a spectrum is? It's basically different shades, different ways that you can be that are not limited to one box. For example, the spectrum of colors is something like the spectrum of sexuality. It's like the same idea behind the word spectrum. So you don't necessarily align with like just like lesbian or gay or whatnot. You can live being in a spectrum of sexuality. Okay, now let's talk about LGBTQ+. So here in Brazil, we're mostly gonna hear LGBT or just LGBTQ or some variation of this. We don't hear this plus very often. And I'm gonna try to explain what this all means. So, you guys probably know LGBT means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual. And then we have the Q and the plus. So queer is more of an umbrella term. So when we say umbrella term, it means it applies to more terms or more expressions of sexuality. So queer in general is something that's non-binary. So it's not straight or homosexual. It's not man or woman. So it applies to it in general. So when we say, for example, if you said, I'm queer, it means you're not necessarily a man or a woman or attracted to boys or girls. It's a general term. And the plus is used to signify some other types of sexualities and genders. For example, pansexuality, so pansexual, intersexual, let me try to think of more, asexual, and so forth. So that plus is a placeholder. So a placeholder is something that you put there to mean something else. So it's a placeholder for more sexualities and genders. Okay, let's keep going. Awesome. So, yes, so Ellen, you have a question. Do you want to share it with the group or do you want to ask me privately? If you want to ask a question.
You want to share?
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Can I say that gender is the term used to designate a social construction of biological sex or not?
That is a very good question and very interesting idea. So yes, gender is very much perceived in modern society as a social construct because it's exactly what you say. The genitals you're born with don't determine your gender. The gender is something. It is a social construct that people who are born with male genitals have to be men as a gender. So yes, it's absolutely a social construct. And thank you for bringing that to the table. Thank you for sharing that. That was excellent. So I could not have defined it better myself. Thank you. Okay. So Eduarda asks, I'm kind of confused. Is there a specific difference between non-binary and genderqueer, or it depends? So queer and non-binary are different terms, but they're very similar. Unfortunately, I could not explain the difference. I am not so knowledgeable. I don't know if Julia's still around.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, can you try to explain? I don't know if you know more.
I do actually. What's interesting about what I like that the question mentioned, does it depend? Because for some people it does, right? because these gender identities, you take it and you make it what you feel. So it's not as set as like woman or male in terms of the social construct. So it does depend, but there is a difference, right? There are different terms. So some people identify more with non-binary, and some people identify more as genderqueer, and there are other terms with so many definitions. But I think it does depend. It depends on the person, and why they use it individually is up to them and what they feel, rather than a specific difference in definitions as such.
Yes, thank you. So all these terms are exactly because we're trying to escape from trying to define everything in a box. Society has this very, very bad habit of trying to put everyone in boxes regarding race, gender. So really it comes down to what Juju said, how you feel, if it applies to you or not. But yes, they are different, as she said. The word queer in some cases means weird. Is there a relation? So that's a very interesting question. So, for example, the word gay wasn't originally meant to mean somebody who is attracted to their same gender or sex. And the word queer wasn't either. And in a way, yes, it's weird because the people who looked at it back in the day, I don't know when this term was coined, I don't know when this term was started using. It's almost derogatory. It was almost not anymore. But when you say, oh, it's weird, it's just a show of the heteronormativity of the time. And I know you guys have the term heteronormativity in your handout. So queer used to mean weird, but now you're probably not gonna see it being used as weird anymore. So nowadays, queer is used more for this, like gay. Gay doesn't mean happy anymore. It does, but now it's almost exclusively used for expressing someone's sexuality. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
May I mention something?
Yeah, of course, please go ahead.
So I don't know if I can put in a new term to understand, but reclaiming, which means just taking back, queer is a part of a reclaimed word. So it was used as you said, derogatory, and then they reclaimed it to use as an umbrella term to mean something completely different. So reclaiming, taking back, and making their own.
Yes, thank you. So Laura, would you like to ask something privately, or you can say, you can ask?
No, I can say here. I wanted to know, because I didn't understand really well, the LGBTQ are genders or sexualities?
So, for example, Juju, do you want to explain? Because I'm not sure if I can give a complete explanation.
Sure. So LGBTQ plus is a community, right? And a community usually has lots of different people. It's the same thing. So you have LGBTQ plus. Some of them are sexualities or sexual orientations, which I mentioned before is attraction, emotionally, physically, romantically. And some of them are genders. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, those are all sexualities. Transsexual or transgender is a gender. Queer depends on the person who's using it, can mean a sexuality or a gender. So because it's a community, the acronym represents many different people, which includes both sexualities and gender identities. Yes.
Thank you. So at this point, are there any more questions? Also, guys, if you have a question for everyone to hear, you don't need to send me a chat. You can just unmute your mic and start talking once I give you the chance. So yeah, I guess we'll be moving forward. And if you have more questions, yeah, go ahead, Adri.
I understand. I'm getting a little confused about all this kind of things. Sorry. and I was taking notes, and I understand about sex. It's very clear for me about sex. But you say a lot of times about how we feel attracted, emotionally, psychologically, romantically, and this is sexuality, right?
This is what?
So, sexuality?
Yeah, sexuality, yes.
So could you repeat the gender? And I understand too, like a girl says like gender can be a social construction too, but that I'd be confused about exactly what genders mean. You understand my question?
Yes. Do you wanna answer that?
Sure. So the definition I have is gender identity is who you are and what you identify as. It gets a little more complicated explaining completely in depth because, as I mentioned before, everybody has a different gender identity based on what they feel. So I think the best way to explain it is you understood sex, which is great, which is the label given to you at birth by a doctor. But some people don't feel male or female, or they're born as a female but identify as male, born as a male, identify as female. Gender identity is what you feel as. I feel like a woman, and I was assigned at birth the female, a woman. But some people don't feel woman. Some people feel that they don't fit in those boxes and they're in between on the spectrum. So they don't fit in what was set. It's a very complicated definition, and being confused is totally okay because it's definitely confusing. But does that clear anything up?
I think I understand what you mean now. It's like when a girl, since she's a little girl, and then we saw a lot of notice about that actually right now. Like girl that she doesn't feel like a girl and she wants to get dressed up like a boy and etc. etc. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Let's keep going. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the article that we read. I don't know if you guys can see can you guys still see my screen?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
So we read this article. Does anybody want to give a summary of the article? So to summarize is to give the main points of the article. Anyone?
Can you repeat?
Yes. So can anybody try to explain what the article said?
Oh, okay. I am shy. Let's go try. This is article can speak for and decision the court and the court of the earth and say and decision to supreme court to create release better for the workers LGB. Esqueci como é que se fala a sigla em inglês.
Sorry, could you say what's the word?
A sigla se pronuncia
LGBT.
Ah, tá. LGBT. This is a decision for the court American to create and rules better to create better rules and works for LGBT workers.
Yes. So basically what Victor said and what the article says is that the Supreme Court passed a ruling, a law, that this is the key part of the article really, which prohibits discrimination based on sex. Should be understood to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So can you guys see how those are the terms we talked about? So sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So previously, the law, when you say based on sex, it's really not specific enough. It's not encompassing, so it's not accommodating, or it doesn't represent really how, like, the whole spectrum of who a person is. When you say sex, because as we said, sex is you're born with the genitals of a man or you're born with the genitals of a woman. So what this law means is an employer cannot refuse someone because they are gay, or they cannot refuse that person because they identify as they identify with a gender that does not match the genitals that they were born with. Does everybody understand what the law means? If not, you can just unmute your mic and ask a question. Awesome, cool. So can anybody tell me any words or concepts that they did not understand? If you have them. Cool, so as long as everyone's clear about everything, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so why is this important? And I kind of touched on it, and I think it has a lot to do with what Juju said. So why is it important that this law was passed?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so why is it important that this law was passed? Why is this law important?
I think it's because now who is LGBT can be who they really are in their job. They don't have to use a mask.
Yes, that's awesome. Anybody else?
I read it.
Okay, so hold on. So I think let's do Adriele, Kaique, and I don't know if Jonas was going next. So let's do Adriele first, okay?
Also, like, we are part of a society, so I think in logic, we all need to be included in this society that we live. So make it all LGBT make part of society, and for the other citizens, show that they need to be respected, and like everyone, it's not like a part of society. They are part, like a conjunction of the group.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because we are going to be talking about this later, about being a part of society, because we're going to talk about the social contract. So, Kaique, you're going to go next.
Oh, okay. I read it that if I read right, and the law says that you cannot fire an employee because their sexuality.
Yes. So that's perfect. And why is that important? Okay, so would you like me to pass this to Jonas, Kaique? Okay, Jonas, go ahead.
Okay.
Or, yeah.
Can talk?
Yes, go ahead.
No, actually, they said everything I was about to say.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on. Also, guys, so basically the time on this meeting is like running out. It's ending, so it's gonna end super abruptly, and then when it ends, just click the link again, okay? Just click the link again, okay?
Okay, can I talk for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that this law is important because the discrimination is a real thing, is something that happens, but is a way to give like a weapon because to the LGBT community, because when they feel that they are being discriminated, they can really say, hey, you are going against the rule. You are not doing something that is fair, and they can complain about it. And they are not, eu não sei como dizer indefeso.
Yeah, they're not helpless.
Yeah, anymore.
Yes. Yeah, that's very important because you can't allow homophobic, anti. Well, go ahead.
Can I try?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe that decision there should be in many other parts, and not only in the work. The discrimination because of sex, gender, sexuality is the biggest problem in their society. And this decision is the biggest advantage for the question and liberty of expression for the people. In order, indecision created in other parts and school uh, in my in 1 minute, please.
No problem. I just have to say we have like less than a minute left, so it's gonna end. But then rejoin. Just click the link again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but no, you can keep talking. Yeah, but go ahead. Should I? So